second here. I wanted to go ahead and start by sending links out to chat for everything that I'm going to cover. Well, everything that has links that I'm going to cover. Where's the chat at? It's hard to find things when you're actually presenting. There we go. It's a pretty big list, but you guys should be able to copy that and make heads or tails of it. Well, let's get started. Today we're going to be covering some more specific knowledge. Last session we kind of went through some more of the bases and try to cover what kind of things you want to be looking out for and what kind of general troubleshooting steps you might need to keep in mind whenever you're going through or trying to troubleshoot a Crown Amp or answer a support ticket. Today we're going to be looking more at an in-depth dive on a few of the Crown amplifier series. Today would be the CDI Drive Core series, the Sequel series, which is the CDI, DSI, and XTI2, the Comtech Drive Core series, which is a little bit niche, and the Drive Core Install series. And then we'll also have some time at the end for a Q&A. I will also be kind of stopping in between each family to let everyone ask questions if they have any, just try to keep everyone engaged. So hopefully you guys overseas aren't going to get too tired and will be able to participate. All right. So we'll start with the CDI Drive Core series. These have been in production roughly since April 2016. There are 2 RU chassis and have 2 and 4 channel output models with 300, 600, and 1200 watts of power. The family includes a BlueLink variant as well, which is notated by the BL tag on its badge number and part number. These amps have Phoenix connector inputs and screw terminal outputs. They're all network enabled and can be controlled, configured, and monitored through Audio Architect. The BlueLink variants have 2 extra BlueLink ports, which you can see on the picture of the back of the unit. All of them are 70 volt capable and they have a pretty generous set of DSP features. Pretty much all of it's accessible through the front display, which a lot of our customers like a lot. Very few features are actually restricted from the front display. That can lead to some tampering, but thankfully that's relatively rare, but something to keep in mind. Especially when you call when a customer says they had a previously installed amp that has mysteriously lost its settings, it's usually tampering actually. And despite the fact that you can access most of the features from the front panel, you probably still want to use Audio Architect for anything like specific like EQs, or if you want to access the signal generator to play pink noise or sine wave throughout, to test the output of your amp. These amps also have GPIO, but that's a pretty rare use case, so we're not really going to cover it. If you have any questions specifically about the GPIO, feel free to ask me or send me an email. The common applications for this amplifier are commercial install. In fact, this is an install amplifier. Sometimes you see them also in cinema and residential landscaping systems. They're actually really common for that residential landscaping application. One thing to keep in mind about the BlueLink variants is that the device files in Audio Architect are not cross-compatible with the non-BlueLink versions. In fact, the non-BlueLink versions are not compatible with the BlueLink versions either. So a lot of time you get some support requests where people have said that they can't install this device file onto an amp, it's because they've purchased a BlueLink variant, but they were given a device file for a non-BlueLink version. So you'll end up having to copy that file over. It's pretty easy. Let me show you how that works. So let's go ahead and close some of this. So if you get a CDI series that has a BlueLink variant, or it's out of BL. So we've got a device file for a non-BlueLink amplifier and a actual BlueLink amplifier. So if we try to, let's open up the BlueLink version. If we try to actually install a device file to this, it'll give us an error message. Here I made a, there we go. That's the error message that the customer will see, and they'll wonder why they can't do this because they think they've got the right amplifier. So if that happens, what you can do, I'm going to go ahead and load that into the correct file now. If that happens, what you can do is you can actually open up that amp, just a virtual copy of that amp, and you can actually just copy the parameters and paste them directly into the other amp. That's pretty common this day and age because we all have amp shortages worldwide, and people are just buying whatever they can get their hands on. So this you'll actually end up using this skill quite a lot in support requests. All right, let's move on to the common support requests you receive with this series. I think the most bothersome of which is the high/low voltage rail warning. This is a error message that's displayed on the front panel of the LCD display. It's usually, you'll see high voltage rail warning displayed, followed by low voltage rail warning, and then the two messages will cycle back and forth repeatedly. Unfortunately, this error doesn't actually mean anything other than it's a general hardware failure. It does not point to anything any specific hardware failure. It's just kind of a catch-all term. There's a lot of different things that might actually fail that would cause this error to be displayed. Sometimes you actually can get it to go away with a long power cycle. You'll want to power down the amp, unplug it, and let it sit unpowered for an hour or an hour or longer. I mean, a lot of times it's better just let it sit overnight unplugged and then plug it back in the morning. Sometimes it's successful. I would say maybe like 20% of the time. But usually it's not. The vast majorities end up requiring an RMA for repair. Unfortunately, we don't have a smoking gun that will tell us what the actual is. Our sustaining engineering team has been looking into it for a while. It's just a little bit difficult because every time it ends up being a different hardware issue. Next is the channel X HF detect, where X is the specific channel number. Channel 2, for example. This is another error message found in the LCD display. It can be kind of tricky to troubleshoot because the issue can be within the amplifier or the speaker. Tends to be channel specific and almost exclusively happens with 70-volt loads. Long 70-volt runs are a lot more likely to cause the error than short runs, and it almost never happens. You'll pretty much never see it with low impedance loads, your 8 ohm, 4 ohm, 2 ohm loads. It's good to check anyway, though. So one of the things you'll want to check is to make sure that they have the 70 volt activated properly. So if they've got if they got 70 volt mode activated, but they're running a 8 ohm load, you might see this error. And so that's one way you want to check. Let's see. You can kind of quickly check to see if they're in 70 volt at a glance without having to dive into the settings, because there'll be a little lightning bolt displayed by the channel number. So if channel 1, you'll see a little lightning bolt that tells you that 70 volt or 100 volt is activated, high Z is activated on that channel. It'll be on the main page of the amplifier. So to begin troubleshooting this, the easiest thing to do is start by moving the speaker lines. So if you're seeing this channel 2 HF detect, you want to move the speaker wires from channel 2 to channel 1, and see if the issue follows the speaker line or if it stays on that channel. If it stays on that channel, it's definitely going to be an amplifier issue, and you're just going to want to RMA that. If it moves, though, then you want to have the customer check the impedance of their speakers. Go and check every single one, because there's a good chance that one of those speakers is actually defective. Also, if they have an inline volume controller, I think we talked a lot about these last time. When they tend to fail, they cause all kinds of havoc, including this HF detect error, because the impedance changes and it causes oscillation in the line. Anytime you instruct the caller to swap wires in the back of the amp, you'll want to make sure that they turn the amplifier off. Ideally unplug it, because especially with bare wire applications, if you get a frayed piece of wire touching both positive and negative at the same time accidentally, that will cause a short, and that might actually destroy the amplifier. The amps do have protection built in for this, but it's better not to test that. Okay. Other points of failures that you'd want to check, especially with 70 volt lines and distributed systems, you want to have them check the all of the terminations at the speakers and at the daisy chain connections. A lot of times the daisy chain connections will be like wire nuts, and sometimes the speaker wire might be just a little bit loose in one of those wire nuts, or just a little bit loose on a Phoenix connector that's been daisy chained, because they've got 2 wires going into a small connection. And if it's not sitting in there right or making good contact, you can end up with oscillation on the line. If they have inline volume controllers, make them delete them from the chain, and that will almost always get rid of that issue. Let's see. Instead of using inline volume controllers, we recommend using the BSS Contrio wall controllers, which are compatible with these amps. If you're going to do that, you'll definitely want to use limiters, though, because you're controlling the amp's gain directly. So you're potentially going to be dealing with a situation where you can have the amp output more power than the speaker can handle, and will potentially blow your speaker. So set the limiter. This amp does have a very detailed limiting suite, so you want to make sure you use that. Moving on, another major source of support requests for the CDI drive core is sleep-related issues. This amplifier family has 2 power-saving features: auto power down, which will put the amp into a low power state after a specified period, usually 30 minutes, of no network or input, or no network activity or input. This mode, it will blank the LCD display and it will appear to be off. The second power saving feature is called auto channel disable, or ACD, which will leave the amp powered on. You'll see the display, but it will turn off any unused outputs after a certain amount of time. So by default, it's 5 minutes. If there's no input there above -80 decibels, then it will turn that channel off to try to attempt to save power. The issue is that these they don't come out of auto channel disable. Sometimes they'll get stuck there, and the only way to get it to work again is to completely reboot the amp, like unplug it, plug it back in, which ends up causing us a lot of support calls. An interesting note is that the auto power down is only available on the 4-channel units. Like the CDI 2x300 would not have it, for example. You could go in there, you could hit the checkbox for it, but it will immediately uncheck. And this will happen whether you're doing it from the front panel or an Audio Architect. The feature was just never implemented in the 2-channel versions. So the only thing you'll have available in the 2-channel versions is auto channel disable. But these types of calls are more common on the 4-channel models because it's usually an issue with the auto power down rather than the auto channel disable. Either way, you can still have a problem with either one, and the fix or the workaround is the same. The workaround is actually to just go ahead and disable them. So you can do it 2 ways. You can do it through Audio Architect by going into the global settings page of that amplifier. Here, let's go ahead and open that up. You don't need that. You can just go to global settings and turn auto power down off. It's on by default, and auto channel disable, you'll also want to disable that at the same time. Or you can go into the menu tree from the front panel. If they don't have Audio Architect or don't feel like setting that up, you can have them go to the home screen, then press the menu button, and use the encoder to navigate to system settings, power modes, and then you'll see a screen similar to the one we have here in the bottom right. And they can then use the encoder to uncheck those 2 boxes and then hit done, and all of their problems will go away. Unfortunately, we don't have a fix for that yet. There were some attempts at resolving it with the latest firmware versions, and they've got limited success. Sometimes it works. We still do get calls on it all the time. We haven't really paid too much attention yet on the if the new version has been very successful in the field, but I believe we still have seen some issues with it even on the newer firmwares. All right. Low output is another concern that we get a lot. It's really common with, well, it's almost always going to be an input issue. But the first thing you're going to want to check even before that is to make sure that the fader is actually turned up. So go to the main menu and have them read out what the numbers on the main display actually say for each channel. It's real, like those amps ship by default at -40, which is really, really low, basically off. And I've asked people what the fader was turned up to or was turned to before, and I've had someone tell me that it was set to 56. When 0 is actually the most, so it was actually set to -56. They just didn't realize that that's what it was. So once they turned it up, it was fine. It sounded good, and they were happy. The second issue, though, is low input. These are professional amplifiers expecting a professional line level input source, but they get commonly used in home applications, especially with the Sonos port here in the US. I'm sure you guys have something overseas in the UK and Europe that is a similar device, but when you get these calls, you'll want to make sure you kind of want to take a look at what it is, and if it's a consumer audio device, there's a good chance it's just not going to be able to provide enough input to the amp to get it to reach its max output. That said, there's two ways to fix this, kind of like I explained last time. You can add a preamp, such as the RDL TX-LC2 or the ART CleanBox Pro. For the CDI, I usually recommend the RDL because it's more synergistic. It has screw terminal inputs and screw terminal outputs, so it matches with this amp a little bit better. Then the second way is to add bandpass gain in the crossover. So from Audio Architect, I can show you how you would do that. Let's go ahead and clear this amp. You would actually just enter the crossover page and adjust the gain here. I usually like to have the customer start at +9 decibels. You have up to 24 decibels of gain to add here, but you don't want to add too much because you're going to be messing with the signal to noise ratio. And if you turn it up too much, there's a good chance you're going to start hearing a hiss. That said, +9 is pretty safe and it's usually quite effective. So that's a good place to start. You can also do this from the front menu panel. I recommend everyone go out and look at the owner's manual because it has the menu tree for this. But it's pretty straightforward. You'll go to the menu tree, you go to configure amplifier, then speaker tunings and DSP. Then you'll go to the crossover tab, crossover page for each channel. You're gonna want to do this for as many channels as needed. And you can scroll down to the gain parameter using the encoder and adjust it to +9 decibels. The customer at that point can adjust it from there up or down. Maybe they don't need 9 decibels, maybe they need 6, or maybe they need more like 15. Just depends on whatever they're using as an input source. On to power questions. We get power questions on pretty much all of our install amps. Installers would like to know just how much power these things are using. In fact, we should probably go through one of these just to see what they look like and how, or what kind of questions they will actually, you should expect to be asked. Okay. All right, so what we're looking at here is like the CDI 2x300 BlueLink model in this situation. Actually, this is the BlueLink and BlueLink versions. They kind of have the same power output. So these numbers are actually based on the input voltage. So over here in the US, we're almost exclusively looking at 120 volts, although with the CDI DriveCore series, it is a universal power supply amplifier, so it will accept any voltage between 100 volts and 240. So it'll basically work anywhere in the world. You'll just kind of look at the voltage that you're expecting, and these numbers actually assume all channels driven. Now you've got two different numbers here to look at here. You have the 1/8 power pink noise number and the 1/3 power pink noise number. That represents how much power this amp is going to draw in those applications. 1/8 power is whenever you're bringing the amp up to just clip. The amplifier is like just starting to clip. It might clip like once a second. Probably not any more than that, once every few seconds. That's a pretty typical application. You would almost never drive it higher than that. So it's generally what you want to spec if the customer's wanting to know which number that they need to use, how many of these they can put on a circuit. But they'll also need to know like how much impedance or how they're planning on using the amp. So if they're going to use this in a 70 volt application, then we know that driving both channels just to clip, that this amplifier is going to draw 1.3 amps from the wall at 120 volts. Overseas or in commercial installations that have 230 volts, you're going to get more like 0.8 amplifier or 0.8 amps. And sometimes people will ask you, well, what's that in watts? And we know, well, we know that wattage is just voltage times amperage. So you can open up a calculator here, and we can take our voltage, so 120 volts here in the US, multiply that by our amperage, 1.3. And we know that that system is going to draw 156 watts from the wall, assuming they're pushing it to just clipping. If they're pushing it to extreme clipping, where it's clipping more than once a second and like just clipping rapidly all the time, it's going to be more like 2.5. But that's a really, really rare use case. Almost no one uses an amp like that because it's a good way to destroy your speakers. You know, never want to be sending a clipped signal into the amp. But a lot of people do want to plan for the extreme worst, and in which case this is the number they would use. So 2.5 amps times 120 volts, we get 300 watts. So on a 15 amp circuit, which is typical in the US, we have 1800 watts. We only want to use 80% of that. So that gives us 1440 watts. We can divide that by 300 watts. That tells us we can put 4.8 amps on the circuit. You can kind of round that to 5 pretty safely. Generally speaking, these numbers are not actually going to be reached because it also assumes that you're running in pink noise, which is not typical. Pink noise is actually pretty stressful on the amplifier as far as its output because you're pulling frequency on all of the frequency bands at the same exact time. And program content just doesn't do that. So generally speaking, you're going to be way south of that number. All right, so let's close that. The other type of question that's common is, especially here in the US, is for the 20 amp IEC connectors that you find on the CDI, well, on the models with the larger outputs, like the CDI 4x1200 and the 1200BL. I think that's the only models that have a 20 amp IEC connector for the CDI drive core series. People commonly think that their amp has shipped to the wrong power cable. They can't plug it in because it's got a 20 amp cord, but that's still a US power cord. It's just designed for more power than they have on that circuit. That said, they can still actually find a cable that will work for them that has what you're actually looking for is a C19 to NEMA 5-15P cable in that case. That will allow them to plug it into a standard 15 amp socket, but they'll want to be really careful with that because you'll want to make sure that that's not going to overload the circuit. So in this case, we'll want to go back to our power draw and thermal chart again and check. So looking for the 4x1200, there we go. If we were running the 70 volts with all 4 channels being driven, we would be drawing 7.2 amps. So that would probably be fine to put on a 15 amp circuit. You probably could even get 2 of them on a 15 amp circuit, assuming you aren't going to be driving every single channel. It's very common that you're only going to be driving 3 channels or 2 channels, or not driving them all the way up to clip anyway. If you're not sure, or if the customer is not sure or feeling uneasy about it, they can always speak to an electrician. I'll pretty much always recommend that. It's like, if you're not sure, just go ahead and talk to an electrician, show them these power draw figures, and let them give you the best advice. All right. All right, finally we have the factory reset procedure. I'll try to go cover the factory reset procedure for all of our amplifiers. Generally, people don't call about this specifically, but it can be a useful troubleshooting tool if you run into a weird problem that you just don't know how to solve. Going with the factory reset's a pretty good troubleshooting step. It resolves a lot of issues. One of the main reasons why you might want to use the factory reset is because of access control. If someone's set an amplifier and that amplifier is locked, they can't match it. If they look at it in a net setter, instead of showing discovered, it'll show locked. Then that amp has been locked by access control, and the only way to unlock it is to know the password, which when you click on the lock, it'll pop up, it'll give you a prompt asking for that password. So they'll have to know that password, otherwise they'll have to factory reset the amp, which will also clear that locked state. The factory reset procedure is outlined here, but it's also on page 77 of the owner's manual. I've shared the link for the owner's manual. Feel free to take a look at it on your own. I mean, whenever you guys have time. This particular factory reset procedure talks about using the channel 1 and channel 2 select buttons. That actually is the same across both the 2-channel and 4-channel variants. It doesn't matter which one you have, you're still going to hit the channel 1 and channel 2 select buttons in this procedure, and then hold the power button to turn it on, and follow the rest of the procedure, and you're good to go. All right, that actually is the end of the CDI drive course series. I want to take a second to ask if anyone has any questions. I know I've been moving across that pretty quickly, and there was a bunch of data, so. I know some of you guys are already supporting these things. I'll give you guys a chance to ask any specific questions that we might not have covered here, or some things that you're unclear about. We'll also do a Q&A at the end, but I'm gonna go ahead and move on since I'm not getting anything. All right. Next week, go ahead.
Before we move on the DSI amp, getting questions on putting those into 70 volt mode.
That would be the DSI 2.0 series. I can talk to you about that after the training session. The DSI 2 we're not really going to cover today. They are very similar to the CDI series, but that's actually more of an advanced thing because you're using a non-70 volt amplifier and a 70 volt application. And there's a few ways to do that, but we'll have to talk about that later. All right, so we'll move on to the next amplifier family, the Sequel family, which includes the CDI, the DSI, and XTI/XTI2 models, the originals. We've been selling these things since about 2004, and I honestly believe like they're some of the best bang for the buck amplifiers in all of pro audio. Since we've been producing them since 2004, they've obviously stood the test of time. We've got all the 3 different variants. They're all identical in terms of output power, but the main differences between them are their intended applications, which you will see based on their input-output configuration. First, we have the I don't have my CDI. I was expecting to see the CDI. All right. There it is. We have the CDI 1000 series. The CDI series, it's got Phoenix connector inputs and screw terminal outputs. So this is a true install amp. with install amps, they're generally designed for bare wire applications. So you don't have to deal with bulky wires, trying to run, or bulky connectors, trying to run those through conduit, and you can make custom length cables really easily for like clean rack installations. This is also the only amp of the series that has 70 volt capability. Next, we have the DSI series, which I believe is discontinued. This is the original DSI, not the DSI 2.0 that you were referring to, Randy. But we still get some calls on these. They're not as many, but we still it's a part of the family. So everything that I say for one kind of applies to it. That's kind of why I included it here. It has it's very similar to the CDI, only it doesn't have 70 volt. It does have the Phoenix connector inputs, and its special sauce is that it has the HD15 connector, which is designed for connecting to cinema booth monitors and cinema processors for movie theaters quickly and without having a fuss with stripping wires. It uses a standard VGA cable to connect these to make that connection. This series, yeah, it has been discontinued in favor of the DSI-2, which you're going to cover in another session. Then we've got the XTI series. And the XTI2 series. The XTI series has actually been discontinued in favor of the XTI2 series. This is a general purpose public address amplifier. It can also be used for some light touring. Like oftentimes you'll see big touring rigs that use these as backup amplifiers or an amp to drive a set of delay speakers, for example. Then you also see these commonly being used more and more in residential installations and home theater uses. One thing that the XTI2 series has that the XTI series has, actually it's two things, is it has a, well, one is subsynth, which subharmonic synthesis, which will add in the extra frequencies that are missing to smooth out your bass response. Makes your bass sound much more full and clean. And then it also has much more configurable limiter options. The other amplifiers, the CDI and DSI, the limiter is actually really limited, and the original XTI as well. The limiter was limited to -3 decibels, -6 decibels, and -12 decibels from the clipping point of the amplifier. So if the amplifier was starting to approach clipping, and it got within 12 decibels of clipping on the output, then it would limit at that point, or depending on how you had it configured. If you had it set to -6, then you got within -6 decibels of clipping, that's when it would start to limit the output. That's much less desirable because if your speaker, if that's still outputting more power than your speaker can handle, then there's not really much you can do about that. And the XTI2 series kind of addressed that by adding much more configurable DSP. So common support requests, one of the ones that we kind of receive the most, that at least ends up being the most bothersome, is that the amplifier won't power on. This is mostly limited to the 1000, 2000, and 4000 variants. There is a capacitor in the power supply. We call it capacitor C196 that tends to fail due to heat stress. The fan in the unit doesn't turn on early enough. It's been corrected in firmware since, but they still tend to die. Well, they have the ability to die around 4 years of service or so. It's more common on the CDIs than the XTIs or well, you also see it in the DSIs as well. anything that gets left on 24/7 is a lot more likely to have this issue. The XTIs, you see less of it because they generally get turned off when they're done being used. But there are plenty of XTIs out there that are being used in install applications. So we do get this issue on the XTIs as well. Since it's 4+ years, since they tend to be at 4+ years, usually it ends up being out of warranty RMA. It kind of sucks, but that's kind of what it is. You can also get this error on the 6000 models, but it would be for a completely different reason, and it's a lot more rare. We don't see too many of those. The 6000 models are actually a different type of amplifier. They're a Class I amplifier, or Class BCA, which is essentially the same thing as our iTech series. The 6000 variant essentially can be subbed in as a iTech 5000 almost. It's kind of got the same output specs as it and is about half the price. So it's pretty popular for that. One thing that it's really good at is, since it's got the iTech backbone, it ends up having a much higher damping factor, which is what you want when you're driving subs or anything with a really heavy low end. And they end up being noticeably better at those applications. So if like, even if a 4000 might have the power to drive someone's subwoofer load, I usually still recommend they go with the 6000 because it's a lot better at it, and you're going to get noticeably better output. The next most common question we get, actually this might even be more common, is low output or no output. It's kind of the same as most amplifiers. It's usually an input issue. Low output and no output is pretty rarely an issue of the amplifier. It's almost always going to be caused by no input or bad speakers on the output. You'll want to check for consumer input sources. That's a pretty good sign that that's what you're dealing with. Just like with the CDI DriveCore series. You'll want to make sure that the front fader gain, like the knobs on the front, are turned up to an appropriate level. And generally speaking, we recommend the ART CleanBox Pro and the RDL TX-LC2 because they just work and they are pretty good. The ART CleanBox Pro is more suited to the XTI series, especially for home theater applications. And the RDL TX-LC2 is more suited to install applications. Because once again, because it has screw terminal outputs, it just synergizes better with the Phoenix connector inputs of the CDI series. If someone calls about no output at all, not just low output, sometimes low output, sometimes no output can be low output, but if they're really getting no output, there's a few things that we want to try. I usually tell them to try using another input source. Also, they want to log into the amp via Audio Architect and see what kind of input the amp says it's receiving. The second benefit to this is, in Audio Architect, you can run the pink noise generator on these amps and get a pretty good idea of what the amp is actually doing. So let me go ahead and show that what that looks like here. CDI series. Hopefully you guys can see that. I know it's pretty small. So we're going to want to be looking for input here on the left on our, oops. Here we go. All right, get my pointer here. So we're going to want to be looking for input here on the left side. These numbers should be jumping up to a decent level. Like, sometimes they're hovering down around -40. If they're hovering that low where you can barely see them, this is actually just another low input issue. And we can solve that by, like I said, using the using a preamp. You can also solve it again by using the crossover. Same rules apply, where we kind of we only want to add as much gain as we need. So from here, you just want to have them increase it to like plus 9 decibels. This amp actually only gives you plus 15 decibels of gain on the preamp, but again, I found that plus 9 is usually a really good place to start. You generally get plenty of output without running into the issue of getting a hiss because you're messing with the signal to noise ratio. The other things you want to check for are to make sure the amp is not in bridge mode. You can notice that by seeing a little indicator above the BRG symbol. Here, let's see if I can find a picture of that. All right. So we can see we've got the indicators on the front panel here. If they're telling you that they have no output, but they've got speakers connected to channel 1 and channel 2, and then the BRG is lit, then the amp is in bridge mode and it's never going to output unless they've got their speakers connected to bridge. So they'll want to disable bridge, and that should resolve their issue. Now, I didn't show you guys the internal pink noise generator. So one way to test to see if you actually have output is to run the pink noise generator. So you just go into any one of the input blocks and you can hit enable on the pink noise generator and then slowly drag the fader up until you start actually hearing noise. If you get all the way up to max and you're still not hearing anything, then you'll want to check to the speaker wires and the speakers themselves. You'll also want to look at the output level here. It's very rare that you'll have the pink noise generator and see output on the output meters and not hear anything on the speakers if the speakers are working as intended. Oftentimes, if they're not, it's because the speakers are blown or you have a shorted speaker somewhere. Especially on like residential landscape systems, if you'll have underground subwoofer that's full of water, you can have it so that you're seeing plenty of output on these meters over here, but you're not hearing anything because that subwoofer just can't move. It's inundated with water. Also, on outdoor systems, sometimes like critters will chew through the wiring, and that will lead to issues as well. Just going to turn off that laser pointer. Next, we have muffled voices. This is actually really common whenever you have residential installs with inexperienced installers. It will be due to improper input wiring. They're taking a unbalanced stereo input and then using that as a balanced input, or essentially they've got a red wire, a white wire, and then the ground wire. They think that the white wire is negative because everyone knows the red wire is hot. Well, realistically, you have two hots and you have a ground. You don't have a negative. But so whenever you plug that white wire into negative, you are phasing out any audio that is identical in both channels. And vocals are pretty much always in both the left channel and the right channel at the same time. So you'll phase out the vocals and they'll just sound muffled if you can hear anything at all. It's really common for customers to say, all I can hear is the music. Why can't I hear the vocals? All the vocal track is missing. You can have them test this by disconnecting the wire going into the negative input terminal. If that makes the audio come back, then that's what's going on. Right. Oh, here's a big one. So a lot of times people just want configuration help. And the most common configuration help people look for is installing a subwoofer and 70-volt speakers or full range speakers on the same amp. It's really common with the CDI series. I don't know why. It also you get calls on it occasionally in the XTI, but it's more common on the CDI. And I've kind of outlined the instructions on what they have to press to activate this mode. But what you want to tell them, however, is that the subwoofer needs to be on channel 1, and this is kind of the standard for all of our amplifiers that have crossover configuration. Usually, channel 1 or the low channel is going to be your like your subwoofer channel is going to be channel 1, and then your full range speaker is going to be channel 2. Or even if you've got biamp speakers or speakers you're running in biamp, so you're running you've got your woofer on channel 1 and your tweeter on channel 2. That's going to be really this kind of the same, regardless of what the application is. They can do it the opposite direction, but you have to use Audio Architect for that. I've kind of outlined the button presses here. I almost always tell I've kind of got this memorized actually, but I always tell the customer that they need to just follow along with me. They won't have time to ask me questions. They'll just have to follow along really closely. So I'll tell them, I'll refer to the buttons as enter, up, and down from left to right, and I'll say, you press enter, it'll be blinking preset. Press up, it'll blink config. Press enter, it'll say low Z. Press up, it'll say high Z, so on and so forth. And when we're done, I just tell them to stop, and it will time out after about 5 seconds, which is why they don't have time to ask you questions about every single configuration. It's the same instructions on the XTI and DSI. You just skip the high Z steps because those amplifiers don't have 70-volt transformers. Another common question is, what does DSP off mean? It's really confusing to a lot of people. What DSP off is actually just the first preset of the amp, which is locked and can't be edited. It doesn't actually mean the DSP is being bypassed, because that's what a lot of people want. There's a ton of people who don't want any DSP whatsoever. They just want a plain Jane analog amplifier. And in this case, it doesn't matter even if it says DSP off. The DSP is still actually going to be used. There's still the audio is going to get converted from analog to digital, processed, and then converted back from digital to analog and sent to the amplification output. Looks like I've got a question here. Customer, this is a budget issue. They prefer to go with the XTI 6002 for an SRX 800 passive series, but on the website we don't have the speaker tuning for the same. Could we please help? So a lot of times, well, for specific speaker tunings like that, no, we really can't. If the speaker tuning isn't available, then usually that's for a reason. Especially on the XTI series, it's kind of common because the XTI series can't hide its DSP tunings, and we're pretty jealous about making Harman speakers, the JBL speakers, sound best on Harman equipment. So they want your SRX speakers to sound best on a Crown amplifier. And if we gave out the DSP tunings, then you could make it sound good on any amplifier just by inputting those same EQ parameters on like into another system that may or may not be, or they may not belong to Harman. So I don't necessarily agree with it, but that's kind of what it is. Let's see. Yeah, and unfortunately, yeah, if the speaker tuning doesn't exist on the website, then we just don't have it. Good question, though. All right. Locked front panel. Yeah, okay, so this happens often whenever people buy our amplifiers used on eBay or just secondhand in general. Also, it happens whenever you've got someone, I mean, amplifier that's been installed for years and years, and someone new has taken over the support duties of that site. They will try to make changes to the amplifiers or get into the amplifier and from the front panel. And when they do that, they are presented with a locked message on the display, which doesn't allow them to do anything. So they call in asking us how they unlock that so they can make changes. And there's two ways to unlock the amplifier. The way it unlocks will depend on how it was locked in the first place. So the first method is to lock the amplifier from the front panel, which you will hold the two right buttons, which is the up and down button together, for about 3 to 5 seconds, and the amplifier will flash locked, or if it's locked and you do that, it'll flash unlocked. If it flashes unlocked immediately again and then goes back to locked, then that amplifier was locked with software and will have to be unlocked with software. So you'll have to get a USB cable and load up Audio Architect to unlock it. So to unlock it in Audio Architect, I'll bring out my trusty CDI again. We've got the front panel lockout checkbox here. You'll just want to have them uncheck that, and that will also unlock the amplifier. Conversely, you can also do a firmware update on the amplifier, and that'll do the same thing, but that will factory reset it. So if they want to retain the settings that are there, then they should just log into the amplifier normally through Audio Architect. And speaking of factory reset, there is no actual factory reset for these amplifiers. The factory reset's actually performed by doing a firmware update. You can just, even if it's already at the latest firmware update, you can just flash the firmware anyway, and that will bring it back to stock settings, clear any configuration that's been in that amplifier, and bring it back to the DSP off preset by default, which oftentimes is what is all you actually need to do is direct people on how to return to the DSP off preset, because that's good. That's more or less the same thing and good enough for most customers. I found that most customers don't want to have to bother with finding a USB cable and downloading Audio Architect because it's kind of bulky. They would rather just go to the DSP off preset, which brings it back to a stereo in, stereo out mode, and that's good enough for them. From there, they can configure it however they need. Then we run into the limiter questions. This is almost exclusively limited. Limited to the XTI2 series. You do get limiter questions on the other amps as well, but like I said, those limiters are way less specific, so a little bit harder to configure. Usually, I tell people on the CDI series just to start with -12, and if it's too aggressive, then go to -6. And I usually tell them not to do -3. It's kind of pointless. There's not really that much of a value of 3 decibels. Let's see, but configuring the XTI2 limiter, this is actually pretty cool. Let me go ahead and open that. All right. So I use this in conjunction with our iTech HD limiter wizard, which I'm going to launch right now. So first things first, I need to look up the speaker. Let's say in this case, we've got someone who has an XTI 4002, and they want to connect JRX 212 speakers to it. So I will come into my web browser and I'll look up the JRX 212. And I can see that this speaker is a 200 watt RMS speaker. It's got a 250 watts RMS, 1000 watts peak. So I'll just set a limiter for 250 watts because that's plenty of power usually. So if I want 250 watts, now I can take that to my limiter wizard. Oh, I need to figure out what the impedance is. So 250 watts at 8 ohms. So I'll take that back to my limiter wizard. I've got an impedance of 8 ohms, and I've got 250 watts RMS. Hit enter, it'll tell me that I need to set my limiter to 44.72 volts. So to do that, you can open the limiter, and I'll want to change my system to the correct number, and then go to volts, and then we can actually just move the slider down until we get to something that's kind of close. So these things kind of run in like a granular fashion. You'll never get exactly what you're looking for, but 44.72, 42 volts is close enough, I think. So that will get you kind of in the ballpark. This amplifier, I mean, this speaker can actually take slightly more than that. So even 45 is pretty good. If the customer doesn't have access to Audio Architect to do this, you can kind of do it for them. And instead, they would adjust this from the front panel. You would just kind of instruct them on how to navigate to the limiter section of their amplifier, and from the front panel, they've got adjustments of 0.1 dBFS, or actually maybe it's I think it's 0.1 dBFS, increments of 0.1 dBFS. So you would tell them to take the amp to negative 4 dB or so, or negative 3.5 dB as a ballpark figure, and you're in the range of protecting your amp pretty well, or your speaker pretty well. Does anyone have any questions on how exactly I did that? Because I know that's a little tricky, but it's a really cool trick you can do with these. I mean, some of the other amplifiers are quite a bit better with it, but it's cool to have this type of functionality on an amplifier that doesn't cost as much as some of our install amplifiers with a full suite of DSP. Give just a minute for questions, because this is the end of the CDI series, and I think we're actually going to have to call it here because we are at the end of our time limit for this particular session. So let's go ahead and open up the floor for Q&A. Anyone have any questions?
Anybody have anything? I guess that's a good training class then.
Yeah, I guess so.
All right, so you're calling it on this one?
Yeah, I think that's the end of the CDI series, and
Okay.
we've got once we get into the DCI, that's actually a huge one, and it'll probably take an hour by itself. It seems like if this one took that long.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, then we'll call this one, and we'll get appointments out for the other ones as we extend this out a little bit.
Yep.
Okay. Have a good day.
Take care, guys.